They laughed at her before the snow came, before the first hard wind screamed across the basin and stripped the last red leaves from the cottonwoods. They laughed before the sky turned white and stayed that way, before the cold sank its teeth into the land and refused to let go. By the time they understood this winter was different, the laughter had died. Long before anyone spoke her name again, shame had already settled in their throats. The signs had come early, late October, and the river already wore a thin skin of ice that cracked under a thrown stone. Elk moved down from the high ridges weeks ahead of time, uneasy and wild-eyed. Coyotes walked the fence lines in daylight like they owned the place. The mountains fell quiet in a way that made grown men stop talking and stare too long at the sky. Most folks ignored that kind of silence. She never did. Her name was Clara Wexley. She was 32, a widow with 3 children and no one left to lean on. No husband, no livestock worth naming, no nearby kin. Just a leaning shack 2 miles past the basin's last settlement, warped by wind and age. The cattleman joked it stood upright out of habit. Clara never joined the joke. She had buried her husband in that soil. G had buried 2 babies there, too. Laughter did not come easy anymore. People assumed she would leave after Hank died. They expected her to take the children and beg her way into town, maybe find another man, maybe fade out of memory. She did none of that. She stayed. And as the air sharpened and the days shortened, she worked, not the kind of work people recognized. She did not patch holes with rags or mend fences for show. She dug. She hauled. She dragged logs by herself across frozen ground. She split stones until her hands bled and packed earth until her back screamed. She scavenged beams from a burned-out barn and pried timbers from a collapsed mine shaft. She bartered for tar. She begged broken grain sacks from the miller. She traded a month of salt for a cracked iron stove door. She built strange things. She boarded over the windows with thick planks, leaving narrow gaps near the top that she called draft chokes. She buried the fire pit and carved a channel behind it that ran beneath the cabin floor, lining it with flat stone blackened with soot. She packed the outer walls with clay, horsehair, and wet moss, sealing everything again with tar. She built a second roof over the first, shaped like a hood, and filled the space between with dried leaves, mud, and straw she had cured herself. When she had her children haul buckets of dirt to mound against the walls, people stopped and stared. When she asked them to help pack it tight, they laughed. "Looks like the widow's building a fort," one ranch hand said. "Waiting for snowballs to attack," another added. They called it Fort Clara. Someone even carved the name into a whiskey barrel lid and nailed it to a post out front. Clara left it there. She had no energy to waste on pride. The joke stopped being funny in November. The snow came early, and it came angry. First a dusting, then feet, then a white wall that swallowed roads, roofs, and voices. For the first few days, folks said it would melt. It did not. More came. In town, the saloon stayed warm only because the men kept drinking. The general store ran out of kerosene before the week ended. Horses froze in their stalls at the livery. The schoolhouse chimney collapsed under ice. People burned furniture, then books, then whatever they had left. Farther out, it was worse. Chimneys failed. Roofs caved in. One boy died from smoke when his father tried to burn coal in a wood stove. Another froze trying to reach family 5 miles away. The storm stopped being a storm. It became a siege. Someone remembered Clara. A rancher named Jonas Bell loaded 2 mules with blankets and food and tried to reach her. He made it halfway before a drift swallowed the trail and 1 mule vanished into the white. Jonas turned back. He told the town he saw her roof through the trees, smoke rising steady. No one answered his calls. They said she was probably already dead. Inside Fort Clara, it was warm. Not hot, not comfortable, but livable. Clara lit the fire once each morning, letting it smolder into the channel beneath the floor. The heat crept under the beds and into the packed walls. The draft chokes pulled air, slow and steady. The double roof sagged, but held. Her children slept close, but did not shiver. They wore coats she had quilted from old sacks and rabbit hide. They drank broth made from dried roots and marrow. They whispered stories when the wind screamed too loud. They survived. Clara Era barely slept, not from cold, but from counting. Jars. Coals. Days. She knew warmth always ran out. Then came the knocking. Not on the door. On the wall, a man's voice, broken and desperate, screaming for help through the storm. Clara Ara froze. Opening the door meant losing heat. Losing heat meant losing children. She hesitated only a moment before ripping the boards loose. A man collapsed inside, blue with cold, barely breathing. His name was Elijah Crane, a trapper whose shelter had caved in. Clara Ara stripped him, wrapped him in pelts, fed him broth, warmed him with stones. He lived. When he saw how the shack held its heat, he did not laugh. He cried. That night he stayed. He helped ration. He listened when Clara spoke of days left and heat stored. He did not argue. He worked. Then, in the dead still of night, the wind dropped. For a moment, everything went quiet, and through that quiet came another sound. Children screaming. Clara Ara did not think. She opened the back crawl hole she had built for escape and waste. The cold cut her like knives. She counted her steps, fighting panic as the wind erased her tracks. She found them by accident. A little girl clutched a smaller boy beneath torn canvas, both half buried. Clara Ara dragged them back by instinct alone. Inside, she worked until the boy gasped and cried. Their names were Ruth and Micah. Their parents were gone. Now there were 5 children, and not enough food. The storm did not stop, and Clara Ara knew the hardest days were still ahead. By the next morning, the shack felt smaller, not because the walls had moved, but because the truth had. 5 children, 2 grown men. One woman who already knew the math did not favor mercy. Clara Ara woke before the others, as she always did. The floor stones were still warm enough to touch without flinching, but only just. The stored heat was thinning. She felt it in her knees when she stood. In the way her breath fogged longer than it had the day before. Ruth slept curled around Micah like a shield. Emmeline sat upright even in sleep, her back against the wall, eyes half open. Josie and Tom shared a bed, Tom's small body tucked into his sister's ribs. Elijah lay near the wall by the draft choke, placed there on purpose to catch the cold before it reached the children. Clara Ara counted again. Food. Fuel. Days. She did not cry. They settled into a new routine. It had to be tighter now, stricter. No wasted movement. No loud voices. Heat was life, and noise burned heat faster than fire. Elijah proved his worth quickly. He did not ask questions that did not matter. He hauled snow, fixed cracks, packed loose clay back into the walls with fingers already turning red. When Clara Ara said no more fire, he nodded and sealed the pit without argument. Jonas Bell arrived 2 days later, pounding through the storm like a man chasing his own ghost. He brought 2 others with him, barely alive. The shack swallowed them all, and with them came truth from town. Town was breaking. Buildings had fallen. Fires had burned out of control. People were scattering, chasing rumors of shelter and warmth that did not exist. The storm had taken command, and no one was in charge anymore. Clara Ara fed them without comment. She saw their eyes move, measuring her walls, her roof, her children. She saw calculation take root. That night, she sealed the fire for good. They burned everything they dared, wood, scraps, anything that would give one last surge of heat. Then Clara Ara closed the channel, packed the stones tight, and sealed the warmth into the earth beneath them. The silence after was heavy. No crackle, No smoke. Just breath. The heat held for days. Faded slowly, like a heartbeat losing strength. They slept closer. Wrapped tighter. Spoke less. Hunger crept in quiet. Children stopped asking for more. That scared Clara more than crying ever could. Tom grew weak first. Fever took him on the 6th day without fire. Clara gave him her share. Then Elijah's. She would not say it out loud, but she was trading herself for time. Jonas noticed. "This isn't going to work," he said one morning, his voice low but sharp. Clara looked at him, eyes flat. "You're welcome to leave." He did not answer. He did not leave. The roof groaned on the 17th day. Not loud. Worse than loud. A deep sound, like something old shifting under weight it was never meant to carry. Clara moved fast. Too fast for someone who had barely eaten. Elijah and Jonas climbed into the rafters, bracing beams with whatever they could find. The children huddled together, singing softly the way Clara told them to. Voices thin but steady. A beam cracked. The sound stopped every breath in the room. It did not fall, but it bent. The roof sank another inch. "That's it," Elijah said when he climbed down. "One more heavy fall, and we're done." Clara nodded. She already knew. They had to dig. Not to town. Not yet, but out. Away from the weight, toward air. They worked in shifts through the crawl channel, carving a tunnel with frozen hands and borrowed strength. Snow poured in. Jonas packed it back to keep the cold from rushing through. Emmeline carried warmed stones to mark the path, and came back silent and pale. The children waited. Waiting became their job. On the 21st day, the tunnel broke through. Cold air rushed in, clean and sharp, but beyond it was sky. Pale. Still, quiet. The storm had stopped. Hope is dangerous when people are starving. The heat died that night. The floor stones went cold under Clara's bare feet, and she knew there would be no more waiting, no more counting days. Ruth collapsed the next morning, just folded in on herself like a tired bird. Clara lifted her heart pounding, knowing there was nothing left to give. "We go," Elijah said. Not loud, certain. They built sleds from chairs and floorboards, wrapped children in every scrap they had. Clara took Tom in her arms. Jonas pulled Ruth and Micah. Elijah took Josie. Emmeline walked. She never asked not to. They left at dawn on the 23rd day. The cold was brutal, but the wind was gone. The snow had crusted enough to hold weight. Step by step, mile by mile, they moved. Clara did not look back at the shack. She did not need to. When they reached town, people cried out like they were seeing ghosts. Hands grabbed them, pulled them into warmth. Blankets. Fire. Water. Clara collapsed with Tom still breathing against her chest. She did not wake for 2 days. When she did, the world had changed. People spoke her name differently now. Soft, careful. They said Fort Clara like it meant something sacred, but Clara only watched her children breathe. Because survival had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had only ever been about keeping them alive. Clara woke to quiet. Not the screaming quiet of snow pressing down on a roof. Not the tight silence of people afraid to breathe, but a soft quiet filled with small sounds, a fire popping somewhere below, a woman coughing, a child whispering another child's name. She opened her eyes slowly. She was lying on a narrow cot in the upper loft of what used to be the general store. Sunlight pushed through frost-clouded windows, weak but real. For a moment she thought she had died and woken into something kinder than she deserved. Then she heard it. A small breath. Close. Steady. Tom. He was curled beside her, wrapped in wool, his cheek pink against the blanket. His chest rose and fell without struggle. Clara lifted her hand with effort and touched his hair. He stirred. "Mama," he said, thin but clear. The sound broke her. Tears slid down into her hair and soaked the pillow. She pressed her face into Tom's head and breathed him in like air after drowning. She did not speak. She was afraid words might crack something open again. Across the room, Emmeline sat up from her cot the moment she saw Clara move. She crossed the floor quietly, like she had learned to do in the shack. "You're awake," Emmeline said. Clara nodded. The others. "All alive," Emmeline said, weak. But alive. That was enough. The days that followed passed in a blur of warmth and soreness. Clara slept more than she had in weeks. Each time she woke, someone new was sitting nearby. Josie braiding string into something useful. Ruth holding Micah's hand. Elijah sleeping upright in a chair, his face gray but breathing even. Jonas Bell survived, though fever took him hard. When he woke, he asked no questions. He only nodded once when he saw Clara and looked away. The town was not the same town they had left behind. Half of it was gone, burned, crushed, frozen into useless shapes. But the people who remained moved differently now. Quieter, slower, kinder. No one laughed. Word spread fast. Not exaggerated, not dressed up. Just passed hand to hand like bread. The widow lived. Her children lived. Others lived because of her. They stopped calling it Fort Clara as a joke. They said it like a lesson. Men came to her bedside asking questions when she was strong enough to answer. Not about bravery, about walls, about air, about heat. She answered when she could. She rested when she could not. When spring finally pushed its way into the basin, it came like a guest who did not know if they were welcome. Slow, careful. The snow melted from the streets first, then from roofs. The ground stayed hard and bitter, but green tips began to show through. Clara stood for the first time outside without shaking. She refused the rooms offered to her in town. Refused the meals, the soft beds, the pity. What she asked for instead was lumber. Nails, tools, quiet. They gave her all of it without argument. When she returned to the basin with her children, the shack still stood. Barely. The second roof had finally collapsed inward, heavy and split. The vent pipe lay bent and half buried. Cracks split the walls where frozen mud had burst. But the bones held. The doorway stood. The floor stones were still set. Clara stepped inside alone first. She rested her hand on the beam above the door, the one Hank had carved their initials into long ago. She closed her eyes. She did not pray. She did not cry. She breathed. Elijah stood behind her, carrying tools. He had not asked to come. He simply had. When she turned, he met her eyes and nodded once. Together, they began again. They did not rebuild the shack as it was. They rebuilt it as it needed to be. Wider, stronger, smarter. They cured beams in open sun, packed walls with dry earth and clay layered right, built proper vents with shutters that could be opened and closed, dug a deeper thermal channel beneath the floor, lined clean and wide. The children helped in the ways they could. Josie learned the land again. She tracked rabbits, set lines, laughed more. Ruth followed her everywhere, copying her steps. Micah stacked stones into careful shapes, testing weight, learning balance. Emmeline took charge without being asked. She counted, planned, watched. Clara saw herself in her daughter and something more, something steadier. Tom grew stronger. He laughed. He ran. He never asked about the fire. By midsummer, the new structure stood firm. Ugly to anyone who valued pretty things. Beautiful to anyone who understood survival. One day, a rider came from town with supplies and a letter. It was unsigned. It said only that people were digging cellars now, reinforcing walls, building shelters. They were calling them Clara shelters. Clara folded the letter and tucked it into the wall. She did not answer. When winter came again, it came softer. Snow fell slow. Wind whispered instead of screamed. Emmeline stood beside her mother at the door and asked if anyone might come knocking this year. If they do, Clara said, we'll open the door. Inside, the fire burned steady, the walls held. The children lived, and no one ever laughed again.